Your Worship, Deputy Mayor and members of Council, I'd like to start off this evening, first of all, by extending my thanks and appreciation to all of the members of the administration who have played a role in the development of the 2014 business plans and the draft budgets. I also want to ensure that Council and the public that this is a draft financial plan at this point in time, and it's a draft budget, and that we will be hearing from the public in the coming weeks as we present the budget submission to Council. Members of Council, as your term has progressed, you've been presented with budgets that have been underpinned by a number of the core strategies as outlined in the Community Strategic Plan, Inspiring Innisfil 2020, which we updated earlier this year to reflect ongoing changes both in circumstances and in priorities. The strategic plan has been a cornerstone for us as an organization and you as a council in making certain decisions as we set a foundation for growth and prosperity within the town of Innisfil. On April the 3rd, you considered a council report which was part of the efforts to develop the financial policies to guide our community, and you provided direction to your administration to develop the 2014 budget based upon certain parameters. Let me remind you of what those parameters were. Those instructions required the administration to develop a budget that limited any blended tax increase to 3% or less. The instructions were to ensure that the overall increase included a modest inflationary increase, which we were estimating at that point in time of approximately 2%, plus our 1% capital levy, which Council has previously incorporated as part of a longer-term financial strategy to build for the future of this community. Almost immediately following the Council meeting, we started setting the direction for the 2014 budget process, and we launched a budget kickoff staff meeting, and our finance staff provided instructions respecting the development of the budget submissions. Once again, we did it as we did in previous years. We established some very aggressive timelines so that we would be in a position to start the preliminary review of the departmental projections for the coming year by August. Without getting into too much detail, let me say that a great deal of work was undertaken well before the senior management team was in a position to review the submissions. We have undertaken a review of the various business plans, the proposed fees and charges, as well as the proposed capital plans. We did a detailed examination of all of the proposed changes and forecast the cash flow requirements. We also continued over the next several weeks meeting with the respective service areas where we convened with the intention of finalizing the operating budget submissions and undertaking a similar review with our senior management team. By early September, the final changes were made to the proposed budgets. In turn, we also contacted the respective bodies who also have a responsibility for the overall tax rate increase, and on that basis, by mid-September, we were in a position to project the early estimate for the blended tax rate. Over the remaining days of September, we were able to complete the documentation and prepare the report which is before you to table the 2014 budget for public review and comment. So today, as part of formally tabling the draft 2014 budget, we also begin in earnest the public consultation process. As you are aware, we will be hosting a public meeting on Wednesday, October the 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. here at the Town Hall in our community rooms for the purposes of engaging the public and getting their feedback with regards to proposed changes or ideas that they have with regards to the final submission.
Your Worship and members of Council, the next portion of this presentation will be mine to deliver to you. The slide before you shows you information that's contained within the BMA study from 2012. BMA surveys 86 municipalities in Ontario, and this pie chart represents the average family income in Innisfil as per that study, which is just under $90,000. Property taxes represent about 3.8% of that family's expenditure. So as a comparison, the Fraser Institute, which is an independent Canadian public policy research and educational organization, does annual reports, and they study the Canadian average income, family, and their tax burden. And so the Canadian average for property taxes is about 4.9% as per the Fraser Institute. So you can tell that Innisfil certainly is, in comparison to the Canadian average, well positioned from an income standpoint. The next slide just illustrates quickly the where does the tax dollars go to? You've seen this type of pie chart before. It illustrates, if you take a look at the town purposes and the future asset replacements, it represents about 40% of the tax bill. So the town council has direct control over about 40% of the average residential tax bill. The remaining portion, 60%, then goes to the school boards, which of course is provincial mandated education rates, police services, which council has some limited control of, and of course the county of Simcoe for the services that they provide. This chart shows you what staff is proposing. It's the year-over-year increase that's being proposed in the draft budget. The average residential property owner's tax bill, which includes all of the staff proposed service level changes, would be approximately $92.83 increase. If you break that down, that's roughly $1.79 a week or 26 cents a day increase in the average tax bill. It represents a blended tax rate increase of 2.85%. So as Mr. Skorobohacz said, Council had given direction early on in April that we were to come in at 3% or under, so this currently represents 2.85%. The police, education, and county portions are estimated at this point, best information that we have available to us at this time. The pie chart here is just, again, another indication of how your local dollars are spent. So, if you took every dollar of tax dollars, this chart would show you where those monies go. So, for example, the police services are considered part of the local dollars. That represents just approximately 0.25% of the local dollars being spent. Some of the other larger areas, certainly roads, activities, about 16% of the bill, and then other areas, as you can see in the pie chart, conservation authorities, replacements for reserves for future replacements, and those types of activities.
As Mr. Davis alluded to earlier, the increase at 2.85% also includes the number of proposed service level change requests. And although you have an extensive list of those service level changes before you in the documentation, I'll only speak briefly tonight about the changes, as we will have a more fulsome discussion about the need for these service level changes at the budget deliberation meetings later this month. There are, however, a number of staffing-related positions, many of these linked to the growth-related pressures facing the town. Some positions, such as the fire-related staff, have been identified through the recently adopted Fire Master Plan and are presented in light of the issues identified through that initiative. In other instances, we see some of the integration of resources between roads and parks that seek out efficiencies and generating a more dynamic working environment. Your administration has provided greater detail respecting all of the service level changes which are presented in the budget submission, and will be certainly providing fuller details during those discussions.
Chart before you, you've seen in past budget presentations. It's a comparison of water and wastewater bill in Innisfil, both what currently is in place for 2013 and what's proposed for 2014, and then a comparison with some of the local municipalities. The town's really been diligent in attempting to ensure that our water and wastewater rates reflect an appropriate balance between the operating costs and the future replacement needs. As the infrastructure ages, many communities are finding the challenge of raising appropriate funding to meet the cost of replacing the assets. We're addressing this need to ensure that adequate funds are being set aside for future asset replacements, and that's consistent with the property tax levy approach that Council adopted back in 2011. The town of Innisfil, we feel, have been out in front of the issue for several years now, while many other municipalities are still scrambling to try to catch up and make sure sure that they've got adequate funds being set aside in those. And you're seeing some of that in the rates, the comparators. The 2014 increase is about $47 to the average user. It would still result in a total annual bill of approximately $1,000, but it's still, like I said, compared to others, a reasonable price that is being afforded to our residents. The draft capital budget and 2015 to 2018 forecast reflects some significant infrastructure, amenities, and equipment investments to address not only the replacement of our existing assets, but also to further the growth and development initiatives that are facing the town. Major items of note is $31.1 million for the Lakeshore Water Treatment Plant Phase 3 expansion. This is really a requirement initially of Bradford West Gwillimbury, so they would be front-ending all of that cost, and the town then would be subject to repayment of our portion of that, again, subject to timing conditions that we have to yet to be determined. The Aging and Out-of-Date Operations Center is proposed to be relocated to the property to the south of the Innisfil Recreation Complex, along with the Salt Management Facility. There will be sharing of services and costs with Innisfil Hydro for the development of this site, so there'll be some synergies there, some cost savings. The 2014 budget also includes an expanded roads rehab program and rehab and repair program, replacement of the Cookstown Fire Station, and a number of other initiatives, including about $250,000 of items specifically to advance Inspiring Innisfil 2020 initiatives. This chart just briefly shows you the capital program. It's at $66.5 million. You can see the largest component is the water component, which is the plant expansion at 62% of the total costs. The next largest component is roads other, which is really the salt management facility and the proposed operations center. This slide illustrates to you the long-term debt. So, no budget presentation will be complete unless we include a slide to address the topic of long-term debt. Council will recall that previous capital budgets included projects that will require long-term debt financing for the growth component of those projects. The annual repayment requirements will be serviced through the use of development charge revenues. These include the Lakeshore Library Branch expansion, the Lefroy Fire Station, the Salt Management Facility, the Innisfil Heights Reservoir. And although we've discussed it tonight and it's yet to be finalized, we have included a component here in the long-term debt projections to the anticipated portion of the South Innisfil drain that the residents would be responsible for. So again, that's a projection. Obviously, that hasn't been resolved at this point in time. The 2014 draft capital budget also identifies the need for debt to be issued for the Cookstown Fire Station, again, the growth component of that fire station, the operations center, plus the potential future need. This is still to be determined in 2018 for the town's share of the Phase 3 plant expansion. The chart that you see before you illustrates the town's existing debt level. That's the blue the existing debt for the town. That's in the blue component, and that's about $30 million currently. That's for this building, the IRC, and other properties. The red, or the middle portion of the bar, represents the proposed new debt requirements based on the projected timing of the projects that I've just identified for you. The top portion, or the green portion, represents the debt borrowing capacity that remains. So it projects out, again, these are projections based on current budgets, and it shows you that over time, out in 2020, we would have only a capacity of about $50 million left to avail ourselves of that for future debt requirements. Your administration has been working on a number of options respecting the issue of strategic infrastructure, and we remain optimistic that creative solutions will provide some measure of relief to us in the future. Proposed fees and charges continue to reflect staff work in developing full cost recovery models to reduce the impact to all property taxpayers by shifting the cost to the actual consumers of the service. Planning staff have undertaken a significant study of their fees in consultation with the development community to address the level of recovery for the services they provide. The planning fees report will provide to Council in the coming weeks leading up to the budget deliberations. Parks and Recreation have met with the representatives from local sports associations and are also looking at initiatives to increase the utilization of facilities for non-peak hours. Staff have also reviewed the building inspection fees and the status of the legislative reserve, and we've determined that the third phase-in, if you recall, Council had approved a 3-year phase-in of the building fees. We've determined that the third phase of the fees isn't going to be required at this time, so the 2014 proposed fees do not include a further increase at this point in time.
So, Council, this concludes our macro look at the 2014 budget, which is being tabled with you this evening.